Good evening, Madam President. Madam President, this vote can't come fast enough for me. I was disappointed that we were unable to vote on this budget last night. I couldn't wait to vote no and disassociate myself from this budget and clear my conscience in knowing that I was not going to participate in the punishment that we are about to inflict on the so many hardworking families and small businesses across this state that are the lifeblood of Connecticut's economy. Madam President, we've been at this for a couple of hours now. This budget clearly includes in it many new taxes, many tax increases, pork, rats. I'm not going to go through all of them again and repeat all the remarks that have already been articulated so well. I would, however, Madam President, like to just make some remarks limited to what I think is one of the most egregious sections of this budget, and that is the change in the pass-through entity tax structure. With your permission, Madam President, through you, I would like to inquire of the chairman of the Finance Committee, the senator from the 1st, for purposes of laying some background as to the pass-through entity tax. Through you, Madam President.
Thank you. Senator Bizzarro, Senator Fonfara, please prepare yourself. Please proceed, sir.
Thank you, Madam President. Through you, Madam President, if the good senator from our 1st district would kindly just take us back to the conversation that he had with the senator from the 8th earlier about the pass-through entity tax and flesh out in a little more detail exactly what that pass-through entity tax is and who pays that tax, how exactly that tax works.
Senator Fonfara.
Through you, Madam President, thank you, Senator Bizzarro. Yes, the pass-through entity tax, which was adopted last year, moves from for those that are members of, multiple members of LLCs, LLPs, and S-Corps, they are required under Connecticut law to file for income, personal income, at the entity level as opposed to personally, filing their state income tax personally. And that is what the state mandate is as of last year. Through you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Bizzarro.
Thank you, Madam President. I thank the good chairman for his answer. I'm wondering, again, through you, Madam President, if the senator can expand a little bit on which sorts of entities this tax applies to and what the impetus was. I understand that there was a change in policy, but I'm wondering what the impetus was behind that change. Through you, Madam President.
Senator Fonfara.
Again, through you, Madam President, it is with respect to multiple member limited liability corporations, limited liability partnerships, as well as S-Corps. And the change was because Connecticut in this legislature decided to move from, for those institutions, from those organizations and members of them, that instead of filing for personal income tax purposes at the individual level, to change that to the at the entity level. Through you.
Senator Bizzarro.
All right. Thank you, Madam President. I understand the change in the policy. I'm not sure I understand exactly why that policy was changed. But in any event, Madam President, through you, Madam President, just to be clear, so when we say pass-through entities and the tax that we're talking about here, it would apply, through you, Madam President, to any LLCs regardless of size. Through you, Madam President, is that correct?
Senator Fonfara.
Through you, Madam President, no, single-member LLCs are not covered under this. Through you.
Senator Bizzarro.
Thank you, Madam President. So through you, Madam President, any multi-member partnership, LLC, even, for instance, family members who are involved in a partnership, would this pass-through entity tax apply to them? Through you, Madam President.
Senator Fonfara.
Through you, Madam President, yes.
Senator Bizzarro.
Thank you, Madam President. And Madam President, may I also inquire through you, Madam President, why this budget decreases the tax credit back to those individual members of the pass-through entity as opposed to increasing the marginal rate on that pass-through entity tax? Through you, Madam President.
Senator Fonfara.
Through you, Madam President, the decision in this process, in this proposal before us, to modify the credit that we established in the last budget of 2018 at 9301. We're modifying it here to 87.5. It's a policy decision that is contained in this budget.
Senator Bizzarro.
Thank you. Through you, Madam President, could the same revenue goal be achieved by increasing the marginal rate as opposed to reducing the credit back to the individuals? Through you, Madam President.
Senator Fonfara.
Through you, Madam President, yes.
Senator Bizzarro.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, may I ask the good senator, through you, Madam President, to explain to me what the volatility cap is? Through you.
Senator Fonfara.
Through you, Madam President, yes. The volatility cap was passed in the, I believe, 2 years ago, and codified with respect to the covenant that ensures that under contract that we are bound by the decision to segregate estimates and finals revenue, which is the most volatile portion of our income tax, which we have repeatedly included in our spending, even though might be there 1 year and gone the next, because it is such a volatile revenue stream, unlike withholding, which is much more predictable. So the volatility cap separates from approximately 3.15. It's been adjusted, if I can find my, here it is. So right now in 2019, the threshold is $3.196 billion. Anything exceeding that level would be segregated off and intended for the Budget Reserve Fund.
Senator Bizzarro.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you for explaining that to me, Senator. So through you, Madam President, going back to my question of a few moments ago, if this budget, instead of decreasing the tax credit back to the individual members or partners of the pass-through entity, would instead increase the marginal tax rate, would that then implicate the volatility cap? Because that revenue then would have to be segregated and would not be able to count toward revenues without a corresponding offset in the Budget Reserve Fund. Through you, Madam President, is that correct?
Senator Fonfara.
Through you, Madam President, any revenue that exceeds the 3.196 threshold that is considered estimates and finals or pass-through energy tax revenue is segregated off. Through you.
Senator Bizzarro.
I thank you, Madam President. That was my understanding in reading this and trying to bring myself up to speed with the pass-through entity tax and the volatility cap. One more question for the good senator, through you, Madam President. My question is, have we just figured out a way to work around the volatility cap, Madam President, through you?
Senator Fonfara.
Through you, Madam President, as someone who argued strongly for the implementation of the volatility cap, that would not be my intent, nor would I consider, as the chair of the Finance Committee, advancing such a notion. It is important that we have a revenue stream that is predictable, that we remove as much volatility from it as we possibly can, and I believe we're making great strides towards that. The fact that we are heading at least through projections at the end of this biennium, to have deposited into the Budget Reserve Fund $2.9 billion, the largest amount ever contained in the Budget Reserve Fund in our history. That certainly would not be my intent, nor is it the purpose for this action that is before us today. Through you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Fonfara. Senator Bizzarro.
Thank you, Madam President. And just to be clear, for everyone around the circle, I certainly did not intend by my question to imply that that was the intent. In fact, I asked that question trusting that the good chairman would give the answer that he gave. That is that no, in fact, having worked so hard on getting that volatility cap enacted so as to protect our precious resources and Connecticut's taxpayers in the process, he would not, in fact, think that we would want to participate in any scheme to work around that volatility cap. So I'm glad to have that answer. I do, as a result of those answers, have just a couple of more questions to the proponent, Madam President, through you. I'm wondering whether the chairman has had any occasion to consider whether there are any implications in any of the bond covenants in connection with any bonds that may have been issued since the volatility cap and the bond covenant legislation took effect last year. Through you, Madam President, is the chairman aware of any bond covenants that might be violated if we were to make this change to the pass-through entity tax?
Senator Fonfara.
Through you, Madam President, no.
Senator Bizzarro.
Thank you, Madam President. And I hope that that's the case. These are things that have just occurred to me, and I'm not sure that I have the answers either. It would appear to me that perhaps it's not a literal violation of the statute creating that cap. It is certainly a violation of the spirit of that legislation and that cap. And I worry that, and I'm not sure if there have been any bonds that have been issued, but I worried that some of our bondholders may see it as such. I also wonder, Madam President, why the decrease in the tax credit back is limited to whatever works out to 6% or so. In other words, why is it 87.5% and not 80%? I think the answer to that is probably, and it's just a rhetorical question, of course, I think the answer is probably because we collectively needed to back into a revenue figure. And I'm not going to put the chairman on the spot and ask him if this is something, having done it this year, that could be replicated next year, because I think we all know the answer to that. The answer is it most certainly can be. So we've decreased the tax credit from 93.01% to 87.5% this year. There's nothing stopping us from decreasing it again next year, and so on and so forth. And I think that is a direct violation, again, in spirit at least, if not in actuality, violation of the volatility cap. Madam President, this is a tax increase. It's a tax increase on all of those hardworking people who derive income from partnerships across Connecticut. So I wonder to myself, why are we doing this? And I thank the good senator from the 16th district for pointing out earlier that I should probably use the term we very loosely here. But I wonder why we're doing this. I spoke a few weeks ago on a bill. I stood up before the circle and I talked about perspective. And most of the bills that we've debated so far really have boiled down, if you think about it, to perspective. It boils down to, our votes usually boil down to a difference in the way we perceive the effect of the legislation that we're going to pass. Again, we've got a certain piece of legislation. We got one group of us that says this is going to hurt, and another group of us that says, no, this is going to help a certain class of individuals across the state. But when it comes to this particular portion of the budget, there can be no debate about the effect here. This is going to hurt anyone who derives income from a partnership in this state. This is going to hurt the middle class people of Connecticut. There can be no debate about that. This middle class that I'm talking about is suffering. This is a middle class that cries out to us for help. And ever since November, even before I got here, all I heard across the state during campaign season was, we've got to figure out ways to help Connecticut's struggling middle class. I heard for 6 months about this progressive movement that's sweeping across Connecticut and across the country. Where is the outcry from members of that group? Do you realize, Madam President, that this pass-through entity tax change that we are about to enact is a regressive tax? Take a look at the numbers. It is going to result in an effective increase of 0.5% on the income derived from a pass-through entity. And as the marginal tax bracket of the individual member gradually increases, so too does the credit back, so that the effective tax rate decreases. It's regressive. We're not going to tax capital gains. No, we can't do that. But we're going to slam the middle class. Where is the outcry? So the brother and sister who own a Mexican restaurant in my city of New Britain, who have no other jobs, because for those of you in the food and beverage business, you know working a restaurant is a 24/7 occupation. Their families who rely on that income as their sole source of support for those families, we are going to raise their income taxes by 0.5%. We are raising their Connecticut income taxes by 0.5% by passing this portion of the budget. Again, this is an income tax increase on anyone who operates as a partnership in this state. We need to stop trying to sanitize this by calling it an increase in business taxes. It is not. This is an income tax increase on anyone who operates as a partnership and derives their income from a partnership in this state. And that is so, Madam President, because by its very nature, a pass-through entity is one in which the profits of the business flow through to the individual members or partners. This is not a tax on the wealthy, let's be clear, because I've seen comments to that effect. This is not a tax on the wealthy. It's not a tax solely on the hedge funds littered throughout Fairfield County or the corporations in Hartford that can pay to have their representatives wander the halls here to advance their agendas. Nope. This is a tax on the middle class. It's a tax on all the small businesses and all the small business owners on every main street in this state. I'm going to ask everybody to join me on a figurative walk down Main Street in your town. I'm going to walk down Broad Street in New Britain right now, just to see all the people that are going to be affected by this. Broad Street in New Britain, for those of you who have never been there, is not only the crown jewel of the city, but it is a shining example of what every neighborhood and every municipality in this state should strive for. 20 years ago, that entire neighborhood, which is now known as Little Poland, Little Polonia, was a crime-infested, downtrodden neighborhood. Nobody wanted to go down there. Madam President, I'm proud to say that on Sunday, we had over 35,000 visitors to Broad Street in New Britain to celebrate our annual Little Poland Festival, including many elected officials. So if I take a walk down Broad Street, because I've heard that this is a tax that's going to affect the wealthy, the big corporations, the businesses that can afford to pay it. I'm going to walk down Broad Street. I'm going to invite all of you to walk down Main Street
Pardon me,
in your
Senator,
town.
I'm just going to stop you just for a moment. I wanted to welcome our guests who are here, and we welcome having them listen to the debate, but we'd ask them to respect our rules, which prohibit videotaping and photo taking. So thank you for being here. We're glad you're here. Senator Bizzarro, please continue. Sorry
Thank you,
to
Madam
interrupt
President. I appreciate that. So I'm going to walk down Broad Street, and I'm going to tell you who this tax is going to affect, this income tax increase. Well, it's every restaurant. It's every deli. It's every diner, every convenience store, every bodega, every barbershop, every flower shop, every laundromat, every clothing store, every antique store, every liquor store, every bakery, every ice cream shop, every bowling alley, every travel agency, every insurance agency, every real estate agency, every law firm, every healthcare practice which operates as a partnership. I trust that many of my colleagues around this circle have lots of those types of businesses in their districts, run by family members, run by friends, run by average Joes, middle-class people just trying to make a living in this state. And we're turning around, and not only are we increasing their income taxes by 0.5%, we're out there telling everybody that this budget contains no income tax increases. I've heard it said on the floor today, this budget contains no income tax increases. Really? Is that so? So I ask, why are we doing this? Why? Because it's a head scratcher for me. Well, I anticipate an argument would be that this is a benefit that the state conveyed not too long ago on all of those individuals. And so they're still better off than before. And all we're doing is taking back some of that benefit. Now that's a bogus argument. So to understand it, basically what we're saying is, look, we recognize that you are paying too much in taxes and you need relief. We hear you loud and clear. We're going to do something about it. And then less than 12 months later, we're going to say, you know what? Forget it. We're taking it back. And we reserve the right to take more back next year. That's what we're doing. And there's a few problems with this argument as well, Madam President. One is, and I was trying to get at this earlier, but it's my understanding that, and I think my colleague, the senator from the 16th, or the senator from the 8th, one of them mentioned it earlier. My understanding is that this pass-through entity tax was something that was enacted in response to the federal income tax changes, and specifically the SALT deduction limitation that hurt so many people across Connecticut. So if that's the case, then I have to ask, well, aren't we presupposing that everybody would be hurt by that SALT deduction limitation? Because when it's revenue neutral, and we could look at a taxpayer and say, this is not going to cost you anything. Most people are going to be better off, but at the worst, you're going to be in the same position. You won't be worse off, promise you that. And that's fine, the way it was written and the way the numbers were crunched. And I know for a fact that the people that put this together spent a great deal of time crunching these numbers, working them, because the math is hard. I've sat there and done it. I've sat with representatives from DRS, and I've gone through this, and I know how hard it is to come up with the numbers. The equation is not easy. You've got to factor in the benefit that you get on the federal level. You got to calculate the difference in the state tax liability. And they were able, to their benefit, to their credit rather, to come up with a table and come up with numbers that were precise, or is about as precise as you can get, which is nearly impossible. And now we're going to take all of that, and we're going to throw all of that out of whack. So when it's revenue neutral, and it doesn't cost the taxpayer anything, fine. But if you were in a worse position now than you were before we enacted it, how is that fair? And the second problem with that argument, Madam President, about it being simply a reduction in a benefit that they wouldn't have had anyway, is that it erodes the trust that the public has in its government. How can the public have any confidence in us? This is why we can't pass tolls. This is why, with all due respect to everybody in this building, we cannot be trusted with a new revenue stream. Look what happens. Oh, figured out a way to get a new revenue stream in. Nope, but it's going to be hands off. We're not going to tinker with it. This is for purposes of bestowing a benefit on the people that really need it. Nope, we got to close the budget. How are we going to do it? Oh, I got an idea. Let's take some of that revenue. Does that sound familiar? We talked about the lockbox, which I never understood. I still don't understand it. We had to pass a constitutional amendment to protect the people of Connecticut from us, their elected legislators. And now we've got to figure out a way to fix this problem with the volatility tax. Because my colleagues, I know, I trust, worked very hard to get that enacted for purposes of protecting that volatile income, that volatile revenue stream. And we've just figured out a way to do an end around. We're not touching the revenue off the top. We're not increasing the marginal tax rate, because then we just have to make a corresponding ledger entry to the reserve fund. Nope. But what we can do is we can simply decrease the credit back. Doesn't violate the volatility cap. Sorry, I said volatility tax. I meant volatility cap. Doesn't violate the volatility cap. Nope. Sure, that's what the lawyers will say. But think about how this looks from the perspective, again, perspective, the perspective of the people that are watching us. We're doing this to help you. It's revenue neutral, we promise. Not going to cost you anything. Less than 12 months later, sorry, we lied. That's what we're doing. if we pass this provision of the budget. And finally, Madam President, the last thing I'll note about the argument, again, talking about the rebuttal that I anticipate, that rebuttal being, well, you're still better off than you were before we passed this. Because that's going to be the response. I know it when I sit down. Final thing I'll say about that is that that logic is incredibly dangerous. Let's think about the ways, if you extrapolate that can harm people. We could say, for instance, well, we're going to divert some money from the transportation lockbox, but at least we're funding it in part. We're putting some money in, so you're still better off than you were before, because before we were never funding it. So now we're going to put some money in. Not everything we promised you, but we'll put some in. And then the year after that, we put less in. We divert it. And what's the argument going to be? Well, you're still better off than you were 2 years ago, because at least you got something in there. And how about ECS? Hey, Alliance districts. Hey, Bridgeport. Hey, New Haven. Hey, New Britain and Hartford. You know what? We figured out a way to reduce the money you're getting, but you're still getting more than you were 10 years ago. So it's still a benefit to you. You shouldn't complain about it. Or perhaps a year or two from now, when we finally hear the cries of all the businesses across the state, we come back here and we say, you know what? Maybe $15 minimum wage was not such a good idea after all. Maybe we went up too far too fast. Maybe it should be 13. And then we'll do a press release and we'll tell everybody across the state, you know what? Quit crying. $13 an hour is still better than what you were making before. I have no further comments. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Bizzarro. Will you remark further?